Hello and welcome to a new tutorial. This time we're going to make a logo animation in After Effects. Let's see the preview of this tutorial. So I opened After Effects and I want to create a new composition. So I click here and I name it main comp. And I set the size about 1080 by 1080 pixels. It is an Instagram file size. And I set the frame rate 30 seconds and also the duration about 30 seconds. And the color is this code, so you can copy it. I press OK. And here also OK. And now we have created our main comp, and I want to import my logo now, so I double press here under the main comp to open the logo. I choose this file and then I set the setting to composition retain layer sizes, and I will import this logo. So and now I will drag this to the timeline, and if I double press here I open all the layers of the logo file. I set the Timmermans to the top and I will pre-compose this, and I do this by going to layer, pre-compose, or you can use the shortcut here, and I name it Timmermans text. I be sure that I select the second option here and I press OK. And if I double press here on the Timmermans text layer, then I open it, and what we first gonna do is show this layer from the outside of the canvas to the inside of the canvas, if that makes sense. So what I'm gonna do is I will zoom a little bit in on the canvas and I will go to 1 second. I press P on my keyboard and I press here the stopwatch, and I go now to the beginning of the timeline and I will drag the Timmermans text outside of the canvas to the bottom, and if I play this you can see the reveal of Timmermans, so that looks good. I will ease it by pressing F9 on my keyboard. I do this to create a smoother transition. I will play it again. You can make it also a little bit quicker to drag the last keyframe to the first keyframe. You can choose this by your own logo, like this, so the speed is a lot quicker. And you can go also to the speed graph here, the graph editor, and I be sure that I select edit speed graph and I create a little mountain to make the transition even smoother. That looks really good. And now I go back to the timeline. I will press U on my keyboard to hide the keyframes. Alright, now I will duplicate this layer 10 times for each letter. I do this by Ctrl D. What we now gonna do is go to 1 second to see the whole logo, and I hide all the layers except the top one. Now I take the rectangle tool, I zoom a little bit in on the canvas and I will mask each layer, and I will rename this layer to T, and I do this for all the layers for each letter. Alright, now we have each letter on a separate layer. and that's what we want. And what we now gonna do is I select second layers. I select each layer except the T layer. I wanna drag each letter layer 2 frames further on the timeline. So I select now all the layers again except the T and the E layer, and I will set this again 2 frames further, and I do this with all the layers. Alright, and now if we play it back, you see this, and that's what we want. Now I take again the rectangle tool and I set the stroke off, I set the fill on. Now I create a rectangle around the whole word. Now I set a mode from this to stencil alpha. If you don't see the mode, you need to press toggle switches modes here on the bottom. I set this to stencil alpha. You can change this a little to make it even better. That looks really good. I will zoom out to see how it looks. I go to the beginning of the timeline and I play it again, and that looks really good, and that's what we want. So now we have animated our first layer, so we can close this. Alright, now we're gonna animate the paardensport text, and I do the same thing. So I select the layer, I go to layer and I pre-compose this layer also, and I name it paardensport text, and I be sure that I select the second option here also, and I press OK. Now I will double press here on the paardensport text layer to open it. I will duplicate this one more time so that we have 2 layers in this one. So I press Ctrl D to make a duplicate of this. I will hide the top layer and I take again the rectangle tool and I mask paarden and I name this layer paarden. Then I hide paarden layer and I set the layer, the top one, visible, and I do the same. So I take the rectangle and I mask sport and I name this one sport. So I make the layer on the bottom also visible. So now I will animate the position also. So I select the paarden layer and I press P on my keyboard. Let's say that we also animate this to 1 second. So I take the stopwatch and I will go to the beginning of the timeline and I will drag this out of the canvas, and I will select both keyframes and I press again F9 on my keyboard to create a smoother transition, and I do the same with the sport layer. So I press P again on my keyboard and I will set the stopwatch on. I go to the beginning of the timeline and I will drag this time to the right of the. I select both keyframes, I press F9 on my keyboard and I will play it to see how it looks. That looks really good already. So now I go to the graph editor, I select sport layer and I create again a mountain. I will play it. That looks really good, and I do the same thing with the paarden layer. So I select the position and I create again a little mountain. I go again to the timeline and I will zoom a little bit in, and I'm gonna see if I want to make the speed of this one a little bit quicker. So what I do is I drag the last keyframes to around 50 frames. It is a little bit too quick for me. So what I do is I select again the last keyframes and I set it to around 20 frames, I guess, and I will play it back. Yes, that looks really good. And now I go to my Arendspoor Timmermans logo animation comp and I will drag the timeline from Arendspoor layer a little bit further. When the Timmermans layer is finished with the animation, that's when Arendspoor needs to be started, if that makes sense. So I will drag this one and I will look back. It can a little bit sooner. Yes, that looks really good. So now we have our both text layers animated.